Okay, last but not least here, I wanted to talk about the discussion board issue that you guys brought up, which was the question I asked you about long-term potentiation. What I'm going to do here, your comments were very, very intriguing. A lot of you found some good videos, some comments about those videos. I'm going to try to, I think, go through what the physiology of long-term potentiation first, and then kind of link it back to some of the discussion board issues. What I can say to you, though, is the main idea behind long-term potentiation, and the reason it's gotten so much interest, is this idea of what happens when you memorize information. Is there any neurobiological change that happens in the brain when you memorize information? And so a lot of the research for this has focused on the hippocampus, and the hope has always been that this phenomenon that they discovered, long-term potentiation, would be that answer. Maybe long-term potentiation is what happens when you memorize information. So I'm not going to go through all the details physiologically, just kind of give you some of the details, but then kind of get back to the big question types of issues that I think are much more important here. So long-term potentiation, what is it? Well, if you turn your book to page, it looks like 524 and 525. They kind of have all the details on this. So basically what they do is, in a rat, they have to actually get some slices from a part of the brain known as the hippocampus. So they get hippocampal slices. Figure 14.21 kind of shows some of the different areas of the hippocampus there. Those details are not critically important for you here. If you want to write them out, you certainly can. CA3 and CA1. Actually, I can give you a little fun fact. CA3 and CA1, which are the two kind of key pathways. CA stands for cornoamones. See, corno, C-O-R-N-U, cornu, amones, A-M-M-O-N-S. And cornoamones in Latin apparently stands for seahorse, which apparently the hippocampus looks like a seahorse. So that's your little trivial pursuit question, cornoamones. So, getting back to our little story here, let me tell you what actually happens in this phenomenon of long-term potentiation. What they basically do is they take some slices from the rat's brain, from the hippocampus, from a rat, and they'll basically do, and I'm going to share with you, 3 phases to a simple experiment. In phase 1, if you actually take hippocampal slices and you put in just a little bit of electricity presynaptically, and then you measure out postsynaptically, what do you think you will find? Well, if you just put in a little electricity presynaptically, then when you measure after the synapse, you should find just a little electricity happening postsynaptically. That's exactly what occurs here. So in phase 1, if you just put a little electricity in to the pathway and then you measure after the synapse, you'll find a lot, or you'll actually find just a little bit of electricity after it. So that's the first phase of these particular studies. Phase 2. In phase 2, instead of just putting a little juice in there, they actually put a whole bunch of juice. And instead of saying a whole bunch of juice, they give it a name. They call it tetanic stimulation. Tetanic, and I think I wrote it on your outline, T-E-T-A-N-I-C, tetanic stimulation, which is basically a lot of electricity, high frequency pulses. So into the rat's hippocampal tissue here, the slices of it, you'll put in a lot of electricity, high frequency stimulation. So if you do that presynaptically and then measure postsynaptically, once again, what do you think you'll find? Well, hopefully you figured out you'll see a lot of electricity postsynaptically. And the name for that postsynaptically uses what you say is you see a large EPSP, a large excitatory postsynaptic potential. So phase 1 of the experiment, pretty simple. A little electricity in, a little electricity out. Phase 2, a lot of electricity in and a lot of electricity out. Phase 3 is the real interesting one. If you go back into this area that you just gave the tetanic stimulation to, and you go back in and you just deliver one little pulse, what do you think happens then? Just one little pulse. Now normally, when it's one little pulse, one pulse in, one pulse out. But guess what? That's not what occurs here. Instead, in this third phase, when you just put one pulse in after the tetanic stimulation, you see a whole bunch of electrical activation. You see a huge EPSP postsynaptically. This, my friends, is what's known as long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation is the idea that you can just put one pulse in. 1 day after the tetanic stimulation, 2 days, 3 days, even up to 4 days. And if you do this up to 4 days after, just one little pulse in, you'll see this huge EPSP at the output end of things. So that is the physiological phenomenon of long-term potentiation. And the videos that you had kind of get at that a little bit, but really not quite that way. Long-term potentiation is a physiological phenomenon that is basically what's going on in the brain. Now, the reason everybody's excited about this, and certainly some of the discussion board comments and some of the postings, even Carleton College and some of the other ones, basically think that maybe this is what's going on when you memorize information. So maybe the idea is, let's say you're studying for a test. Let's say the idea is you study and you study and you study. You try to memorize everything you can. Maybe that's the tetanic stimulation. Maybe that's the analogy. That's tetanic stimulation. And then you show up to the test, and what do you get on the test? One simple question. Well, what's the idea? If you get one simple question on the test, maybe you're able to access all your memories, which you can clearly do if you do well on the test. The idea is that this is a cognitive analogy. Maybe the idea is if you just get the one question, maybe that's like the weak connection that now just the one pulse is eliciting all of this electrical activity. The neurotransmitter involved in this appears to be glutamate. There's a lot of other details with this that we're not going to cover in this particular situation, but the idea is glutamate seems to be the key neurotransmitter here that's at work. So the idea is maybe you have this cognitive analogy. Maybe when you memorize a bunch of information, you're actually getting tetanic stimulation. The problem, and the key point I really want to make here, is nobody knows this for sure. This is a cognitive analogy. We have no direct proof that this is really what's going on when you memorize information. This is a physiological phenomenon, LTP. We don't know if this is really what's going on when you memorize information. So I'm a little concerned about some of the YouTube stuff because the first one kind of paints this as oh yeah, this is exactly what's going on. We don't know that for sure. We know this physiological phenomenon exists. We don't really know if this is what happens when you memorize a lot of information. There are a lot of people who feel like it is just a physiological phenomenon and it's not what is happening in your brain when you memorize information. Of course, this is a key question for the field of cognitive neuroscience. Why? Well, when you memorize something, that's cognitive, and then what's going on in your brain? Is it really LTP? So you can kind of think that that might be the pattern, but we really have no direct proof either way on this. Hopefully some more research can happen that can really show this is going on, maybe with some visual imaging or something. But anyway, hopefully these three presentations kind of give you kind of a good picture of this field of cognitive neuroscience. You need to know about the idea of what's going on with the conditioned emotional response, the sensitization, and then this last one for long-term potentiation. Good luck with your write-ups. Thanks. Bye-bye.